that point, I mean, doing it, how do we situate learning in such a way that really the whole culture of all the participants transcend or move together?
Okay. Firstly, on Wagner, Leyland Wagner. Look, I'm sorry. What I hear about them is very interesting, and I think I'm well disposed towards them, but I just haven't read them. It's not shameful to say because they're one of the big names in the tradition. But what can I say? We can't all know everything. I'll try and get to. There's a gap in my knowledge, so I just can't respond to that. But I'll try and respond to your points about tradition. Let's stick with Gadamer and see what he advises us. He says to find something in the tradition which you too support in your tradition. Now you can find some traditions in this country as in mine which are really repulsive and you can't imagine what they're doing. You know, why, where do these ideas come from, why do people go on supporting them and so on. But the fact is that tradition doesn't come about other than it's meeting some needs of those people in it. What they're doing may be repulsive, aggressive, dangerous, and they may be unself-fulfilling, you know what I mean? So, leading the very people themselves to a disaster. But there's still something in any tradition which you would solidarize. And if you can find what that is, that's your way into that tradition. Particularly if a tradition is in, what's the word, surrounded, what's the word you say for surrounded, under siege. Then if you can find what is their deepest legitimate desire, legitimate because it's something that they're after that you would solidarize, for instance, to stay alive. Right? And maybe they're going a really bad way out of staying alive. Maybe it's to try and hang on to their property in the face of changing laws which they foresee as taking their property away from them. But these are things which, while you're completely rejecting all the conclusions they're drawing from it, you would say, yeah, I can understand someone doesn't want to lose their property, even if they've got too much of it to start with. Right? You'd understand that. So then you can talk to someone coming from that tradition, respond to their actions and their writings, what they say, by going to that thing which is in their tradition, which you can solidarize with. In the meantime, maybe you just fight them, right? Stop them causing any damage. But you need somehow to get beyond that, because traditions don't lightly disappear off the face of the earth. They can linger around a long time, and if we can get to something legitimate that they're trying to secure, hang on to as a tradition, then that's an opening. You know, where you may even be able to work out a collaborative project with them, possibly. And I mean, the subtext of what I'm saying is some of the more reactionary elements of South African society. I don't know what you have in mind. Maybe it can't be done, but I think that's where you have to go to try. And I will promise to read a Leyland Wagner book within the next 6 months, okay? And then I'll catch you again and make a comment.
I really appreciated you describing all the unwritten context, or as a defining context, because I mean, okay, I've used the word environment myself. I know about genre, discourse, field. It's just that I've never seen it so clearly. It's all belonging together as ways of describing context. And I realized that the one that I use is narrative. The disadvantage of narrative is that people get bored because it takes me so long to explain the context. That, you know, they say, when are you getting to the point?
Tell us another story.
So that was really interesting, and I can see how you saying looking at context as a collaborative project is a way around that, because you don't need that much narrative, and you've got a delineated field, and I mean I can see how you've actually made a conceptual leap So,
thank Hegel. Hegel, that modern readings of Hegel refer to the concept as it appears in the Phenomenology of Spirit, which is very popular these days, as a project. That because initially people used to interpret a formation of consciousness as like a whole nation, right? Which may well be what Hegel meant by. But in the modern context, nations aren't just one formation of consciousness. Culture is incredibly diverse and full of contradiction. That's the modern world. Therefore, what you then look at is every concept that's circulating within a whole society is actually like the residue of a project from the past. Likewise, the institutions, which are also just concepts. That's to say, some artefacts, like a building with a sign out front saying University of Witerwatersand, and then a set of rules. You know, any institution is a concept, but the institutions of that connotation on the word as something set in concrete is the end product of the development of a concept when it just becomes part of the world, social world, because it's actually set in concrete, literally, possibly, that begins with, I'd say, a twinkle in the eye of an agitator. Yeah? That's the beginning. An idea occurs to someone out of the conditions of life, then a big social movement develops from that twinkle in the eye of an agitator, and it ends up a couple of hundred years later as just one of the legal institutions in the country. So that's why I say that a project is a whole story, narrative belonging to a particular concept. So, where did this word education from? Well, in Latin that means draw out. I'm just making this up as I go on, by the way. So you then see, the whole development of the story of education starts to be drawn out. The old idea that people already know everything, all you have to do is draw it out. Right? And that was the original idea that got there. Or maybe it's a false story, but it's a story, it's a line, it's a way of understanding what we're doing as educators. Yeah, I don't agree with that one, I don't think any of our Gotskis would, but it's what we're dealing with.
What do you not agree with?
The idea that education is a drawing out of something that was already inside a person. E ducte or something. Yeah, the Latin scholar will tell us. What's it in Lehren? Is that the one? What's the word for education in German? Forget which language you speak now. Yeah. Okay, that will do it. Any other?
Maybe I would answer.
Yeah, good.
Yesterday and today, you mentioned the idea of the social situation of that.
Yeah.
And I was particularly intrigued by your view that by the Gotsky means, by the social situation, learning is in fact a crack. You remember you said so. You even had, and
not really. Look, it's not quite right, because learning is a distinct process, and the concept of social situation development is a unit for growing up. Not quite the same as learning. In fact, it's really important to recognise that they're distinct concepts.
so it's for development
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
learning.
Like learning to walk, learning to, being accepted to sit up at the table with the adults, learning to use language, to control your own activity. So it's a kind of learning process. But learning, I think, as we understand it in thinking and speech, is specifically the development of the intellect, acquiring the culture in which you live by learning how to use the artifacts that are part of that culture. And it's the development of the intellect. Right? Whereas the social situation of development is really mostly just about, well, it's specifically about children from 0 to sort of 17. But there can be circumstances in which an adult makes a development as well, like when you find yourself, dropped out of a helicopter in the jungle and you survive and you can't work out to get out of this, and you become a really good, survivalist. Make a whole transformation in yourself out of the situation you're thrown into. But really, he's talking about the set of situations which are partly the product of the ideas of the culture and the institutions that you're part of, which have certain expectations from you, fit in with the elastic possibilities of a child of a certain age, and present to the child then a series of roles that they're expected to fulfill. Right? And then the child themselves may at a certain point smoothly step from one role to another, but very often, this is where the word trap comes in, they have to fight their way out of the role that they're in at the moment. They're treated like a baby, but they find that insulting. Yeah? That what they really need to do is to be able to get around the house like everyone else, go and fetch things for themselves, and so long as they're left in the little playpen and things given to them, being treated like a baby, they can't make it. So they have to actually overcome the barriers which are constituted by the role that they're cast in. So it's subjective and objective. The barriers are set there by the baby's or child's carers, but doing that in order to meet the child's needs, as they were when they last looked. But the child has, in that situation, developed new needs, but they aren't yet at a stage of personal development where they can have their needs met in any other way, with or without the cooperation of adults. So they have to overcome that they can see a certain amount of their own horizon. If I made that clear, I've rabbited on about that for a while. Yeah? In Perishivanya, which is another key Vygotskian concept, I talk about that as the unit of analysis for understanding the development of character. Right? And the word can be translated in various ways. We don't have the exact word in English. But it's like a trauma or like an adventure, or the German word Erlebnis actually covers both trauma and adventure. You'd say a traumatische Erlebnis, or whatever the word for adventure is. Right? Yeah. The idea is that when you experience a profound emotional crisis, you have the potential to make a development of character out of that. The potential is realised for what Vygotsky calls a catharsis, which is a process of reflecting on that lived experience. Right? And that's his claim, that people develop in character not just through going through adventures and traumas and going on a survival trip and so on, but by reflecting on it. And then they can, by in a sense objectifying it and looking at their experience and learning from it, then they develop character. So they're the three distinct concepts I found: social situation, Perishivanya, and the word meaning, where Vygotsky has given us a model of how to solve a problem. And the problems are all similar, all about the development of the human being, but they're slightly different. Yeah? If you wanted to take, say, emotional development, you would have to work out a proper concept to deal with that specifically. It's something that Vygotsky can get around to.
I want to ask a question in terms of narrative. You ended off by saying that narrative is not just a myth. You started to contrast it with reality. I wonder if you could just explain a bit more what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, in a sense, I'm taking narrative quite literally as a telling of a story. And, for example, the telling of the stories of the heroic period in Greece before written history, those narratives were the means by which the ancient Greek people established their ethics. Right? Now, it doesn't really matter whether Troy killed whatever his name and Helen made her escape. So I don't know. You know what I mean? It doesn't really matter whether those things happened or not, because they encapsulated the lesson of the story. Yeah? And they taught people how to behave. But I don't take an absolute position on that there is no such thing as a factual story to be contrasted with a mythical story, except certainly that people have different narratives. People might understand South Africa as a tragedy, that the wonderful thing they had going up to 1991 is now gone, and the terrible injustices being done to hard-working farmers that made this country, or they might have a different story to tell, of the rising of the first mass political party in the world and their eventual conquest, the revolution, without killing people and so on. So I accept the sense in which people sometimes say neither of these stories is a true one, right? In the sense that there are different views on it. Yeah? Otherwise you can't explain why people have different opinions and have different attitudes towards it. But that doesn't mean, in my opinion, to say that history is in the eye of the beholder. Both the subjectivist and the objectivist position have their merits. Right? And I'm saying particularly about a collaborative project, you can't take a collaborative project as just a narrative. Real people participate in it, chop down trees, make roads or whatever to set up a new town that people are now living in. That's a real project in a material sense, that you can go to that town and witness it there in the statue of the founder of the town at the beginning of the towns and the city limits. In that sense, that's both a narrative that the people who live in that town will tell you and draw pride out of, and maybe they distort history a little bit, make it a little bit more heroic than it was. In actual fact, they were escaped convicts, getting as far away as possible from the prison. But there's still a real collaborative project there, okay?